Dawn in Jerusalem. Roughly 33 AD, the wife of the Roman governor jolts awake inside the palace, drenched in sweat. She just had the most terrifying dream of her life. She calls a servant and tells him to run to her husband with a single message. "Don't touch that man. He's innocent. I have suffered greatly today in a dream because of him." But here's the part nobody talks about. This woman wasn't Jewish. She never heard Jesus preach. She prayed to Jupiter and Mars. And she's the only person in the entire Passion story who actively tried to save him. This is the story of Claudia Procula, and it starts in a world that could not be more different from ours. We're in Imperial Rome, the age of Emperor Tiberius Caesar, an empire stretching from the Sahara Desert to the forests of Germania, from the coasts of Spain to the sands of Mesopotamia. Rome isn't just a city. Rome is the world. And if you're born into the right class of Roman society, you live a life that would seem absurd, even by today's standards. Claudia, according to the oldest traditions, wasn't just any Roman woman. Some sources connect her directly to the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the imperial family itself. She's said to have been the illegitimate daughter of Julia, the daughter of Emperor Augustus. Julia, the one Tiberius married and then exiled for her, let's say, colorful lifestyle. Now, we don't know for certain if this bloodline connection is real, but one thing is for sure. Claudia was extremely high-ranking, pure aristocracy, and you can tell from a single detail that seems small but actually changes everything. Roman governors' wives were forbidden from following their husbands to the provinces. There was a specific law against it. It had been debated in the Senate and upheld multiple times. And yet, Claudia was right there with Pilate in Jerusalem, which means she had obtained special permission, the kind of permission only a woman with connections to the very top of the power structure could get. She could have stayed in Rome, lived in palaces, gone to the baths, the banquets, the theater. Instead, she chose to follow her husband to one of the most dangerous and difficult provinces in the empire, a territory that chewed up Roman administrators and spat them out, a land where riots could erupt over a misplaced military flag. And she went anyway. That decision would bring her face to face with the most consequential trial in recorded history. Now let's talk about Pontius Pilate, because to understand Claudia, you have to understand the man she married. Pilate was not a blue-blooded aristocrat. He was an equestrian, a member of the Roman middle class. In the Roman Empire, an equestrian could have money and power, but he didn't have the prestige of the great senatorial families. Pilate owed his position to a man named Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect, which means the commander of Emperor Tiberius's personal guard. Sejanus was, for all practical purposes, the most dangerous man in Rome after the emperor himself. Tiberius had retired to the island of Capri in 26 AD, leaving the government essentially in Sejanus's hands. And Sejanus was no friend to the Jews. He had strong opinions about non-Roman religions, and when he picked Pilate as governor of Judea, he probably didn't pick the most diplomatic guy on the list. Pilate arrives in Judea in 26 AD, one of the most unstable provinces in the entire empire, a land where religion isn't a private matter like we think of it today. For the Jewish people, religion is the law, the politics, the national identity, everything rolled into one. And into the middle of all this, Rome drops a governor with the cultural sensitivity of a hammer. One of the first things Pilate does when he arrives in Jerusalem is march Roman military standards into the city, standards carrying the image of the emperor. For a Roman, they were just military flags. For the Jews, They were idols. Images of a man who called himself divine, brought into the holy city. The result was immediate and massive. Crowds of Jews marching all the way to Caesarea, the governor's official headquarters on the Mediterranean coast, throwing themselves on the ground for days, willing to die rather than accept the offense. Pilate eventually backs down. He removes the standards, but the relationship between him and the people he's supposed to govern is broken before it ever really starts. Then there's the aqueduct. Pilate takes money from the temple treasury, the Korban, to build a water system. Technically useful, yes, but that money was sacred, and when the protests erupt, Pilate doesn't negotiate. He sends soldiers disguised as civilians into the crowd, with clubs hidden under their cloaks. When he gives the signal, the soldiers attack. People die in the streets. But here's what makes Pilate's situation truly dangerous. In 31 AD, back in Rome, Sejanus gets exposed as a traitor. The emperor orders his execution. Sejanus is strangled in prison. His entire family's killed, including his children. His statues are torn down across the empire. And Pilate just lost the only man in Rome who was protecting him. Every complaint about him that reaches the emperor is now a loaded weapon. If the people of Judea file a formal protest, Pilate risks losing everything: his career, his freedom, his life. This is the man who will sit on the judge's seat when Jesus of Nazareth gets dragged before him. A governor already cornered, already afraid, already making calculations no judge should ever make. And what comes next will test him in ways he isn't prepared for. Before we get to the trial, we need to understand what Claudia knew about Jesus. Because she wasn't living in a vacuum. She was in Jerusalem, or at least spending significant time there. And if there's one thing we know about Judea in those years, it's that everyone had heard about this preacher from Galilee. Jesus wasn't a local phenomenon. By this point in the story, his fame had spread across the entire region. He healed the sick. He gave sight to the blind. He multiplied bread. He walked on water, according to his followers. And above all, he said things nobody else had ever dared to say. He claimed to be the Son of God. He forgave sins. He openly challenged the religious leaders, the Pharisees and Sadducees, calling them hypocrites to their faces in front of packed crowds. Now picture Claudia in the governor's palace, an educated, curious Roman woman, probably restless with provincial life. Jerusalem is not Rome. There are no games, no Circus Maximus, no capital city social life. The cultural offerings are limited, the political tension is constant, and then reports start arriving about a man doing things nobody can explain. Some traditions suggest that Claudia already had a certain sympathy for the Jewish faith even before she heard about Jesus. This wasn't unusual for Roman women of the era. Jewish monotheism, with its clear morality and single God, attracted many elite Roman women who found traditional polytheism hollow, with its petty gods fighting each other over jealousy and revenge. Maybe she heard about Jesus from the servants, maybe from her handmaid, maybe she read the reports from Roman soldiers who had gone to monitor the crowds. Judea was a security concern, and any preacher drawing thousands was going to generate military intelligence reports that would cross the governor's desk, which means they also crossed his wife's dinner table. We don't know exactly how she heard, but we know one thing with absolute certainty. When the dream came, Claudia already knew who Jesus was, because in her message to Pilate, she doesn't say "that prisoner" or "that man." She calls him righteous. She calls him innocent. She uses a word loaded with moral judgment, a word that means she had already formed an opinion about him before any trial began. a pagan woman raised in the temples of Jupiter, recognizing the innocence of a man that the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish religious court, had condemned to death. The leaders of Jesus' own religion wanted him executed, and a foreigner saw what they refused to see. Then came Palm Sunday. Jesus entered Jerusalem riding a donkey through the city gates, with the crowds spreading their cloaks and palm branches on the road. Thousands of people shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." It was a triumphal entry, but it wasn't a Roman triumph with war chariots and prisoners in chains. It was a man on a donkey, surrounded by the poor, the sick, the fishermen. From the governor's palace, Claudia could have heard those shouts. Jerusalem wasn't a massive city. The Praetorium overlooked the main areas, and the Roman soldiers would have certainly reported it. A crowd that size, in a city already packed with hundreds of thousands of Passover pilgrims, was a public order crisis waiting to happen. A man the crowd treated like a king one day, the same crowd calling for his death less than 5 days later. The same voices shouting Hosanna on Sunday would scream, "Crucify him," before Friday dawn. And somewhere in the days between those two moments, something prepared Claudia for what she was about to see in her sleep. Here we are at the moment that changes everything. The early hours before dawn on Friday. Jesus has been arrested in Gethsemane, the garden of olive trees at the foot of the Mount of Olives, in the dark hours after the Last Supper. He's been taken first to Annas, the former high priest, then to Caiaphas, the current high priest. The Sanhedrin has tried him during the night, which was illegal under Jewish law itself. Cases involving capital punishment had to be tried during the day, with at least a full day between the verdict and the execution. They broke their own rules. They wanted him dead, and they were in a hurry. But the Sanhedrin didn't have the authority to carry out the death penalty. That power belonged to Rome alone, to the governor alone, to Pilate. So in the first light of dawn, they dragged Jesus to the Praetorium. And at that very moment, Claudia wakes up screaming. The Gospel of Matthew tells this in a single verse, Matthew 27, verse 19. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." One verse, 26 words in some translations, but the weight of what's packed into those words is staggering. First, the courage. In the entire Passion narrative, across all 4 Gospels, one person actively tries to stop the execution of Jesus. 1. Peter denies him 3 times near a fire in the high priest's courtyard. John, the disciple Jesus loved, stands at a distance. The 12 apostles who shared bread with him hours earlier scatter into the night. The only person who actually intervenes is Claudia, a pagan woman who owed nothing to this Galilean preacher and risked everything by sending that message. Second, the protocol violation. A Roman wife did not intervene in her husband's judicial matters. It went against custom, against social expectation, against every rule governing how a Roman matron was supposed to behave. Claudia knew sending that message could cause her serious problems. She sent it anyway. Third, the source. A dream. In Roman culture, dreams were taken with deadly seriousness. They weren't random products of a sleeping mind. They were messages from the gods, warnings, prophecies. The historian Suetonius records that Julius Caesar's wife Calpurnia dreamed of his assassination the night before it happened and begged him not to go to the Senate. He went anyway. He died on the Senate floor. When Claudia told Pilate, "I have suffered greatly in a dream because of him," she was telling him in the language of their culture that the gods themselves were sending a warning. that condemning this man would bring catastrophe. And now the question that has haunted theologians for 2,000 years. What did Claudia actually see? The Bible doesn't say, but Christian tradition has tried to answer it for centuries. According to some traditions, Claudia saw the crucifixion itself in her dream. Every horrible detail. The hands nailed to wood, the blood, the sky turning dark at noon, the earth shaking beneath her feet. But there's a version that goes even further. The German author Gertrude von Lefort, in her 1955 novel, imagined that Claudia saw the future. She saw the Roman catacombs, where the first Christians would pray in secret. She saw medieval basilicas rising over the ruins of the empire. She saw Gothic cathedrals that seemed to defy the laws of stone and gravity. And in every one of these places, she heard voices repeating the same words. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. The Apostles' Creed, the prayer that billions of Christians have recited for 2,000 years, and the only human name mentioned in that creed, besides the Virgin Mary, is Pontius Pilate, Claudia's husband, branded for eternity as the man who condemned the Son of God. Imagine seeing that in a dream. Your husband's name repeated across centuries in every language on earth, not in glory, not in honor, but as a marker for the act that made salvation possible and damnation permanent. Generations upon generations of voices in languages that haven't been invented yet, all repeating that name as a synonym for moral failure. That's the weight Claudia carried when she called the servant and dictated that message. But Pilate didn't listen. Let's follow what happens next, because Pilate's failure isn't simple cowardice. It's something worse. It's calculated cowardice. Pilate interrogates Jesus, and he realizes almost immediately that this man has done nothing wrong. He says it plainly. I find no fault in this man. He says it multiple times across the different gospel accounts. Pilate knows Jesus is innocent, and he knows exactly why the religious leaders want him dead. Matthew writes it with brutal clarity. He knew it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Envy. The chief priests handed over an innocent man because he was more popular than them, more trusted than them, more followed than them. Then Claudia's message arrives, and the fact that Pilate pauses to read it in the middle of a trial, with the crowd screaming outside and the priests pressuring him inside, tells you he took it seriously. He knew his wife. He knew she wouldn't send a message like this unless something terrified her. But Pilate is a politician before he is a husband. He's already lost Sejanus. He's already in trouble with the emperor. And then the religious leaders play their final card, the one that shuts the door on every escape route Pilate has left. If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. In the political language of the 1st century, no friend of Caesar is a formal accusation of disloyalty. It's a death sentence wrapped in a sentence, and for a governor who has already caused multiple riots and lost his only protector in Rome, it's the end of the conversation. Pilate still tries to maneuver. He sends Jesus to Herod Antipas, the puppet king of Galilee, because Jesus is Galilean. It's a jurisdictional trick. Maybe Herod will take the problem off his hands. But Herod interrogates Jesus, mocks him, dresses him in a royal robe as a joke, and sends him right back. No help. Then Pilate tries the Passover gambit. It was custom for the governor to release one prisoner chosen by the people during the festival. Pilate puts Jesus next to Barabbas, a violent criminal, a man convicted of murder and insurrection. The choice should be obvious, but the chief priests have worked the crowd. They've sent their men among the people to shout Barabbas's name. And when Pilate asks who they want freed, the answer splits the air over Jerusalem: Barabbas. And Jesus? What do we do with Jesus? Crucify him. Pilate asks a second time. The crowd screams louder: Crucify him. Claudia was in the palace. The praetorium walls weren't thick enough to block a mob. She had sent her message. She had done the one thing she could do. And now she was hearing the crowd call for the blood of the man she knew was innocent. Pilate takes a basin of water. He washes his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this righteous man's blood," he says. "See to it yourselves." The crowd answers with a line that still echoes today: "His blood be on us and on our children." And Pilate hands Jesus over. The soldiers flog him. They press a crown of thorns onto his head. They beat him. They mock him. They put a purple robe on his shoulders and bow before him, laughing. And then they lead him through the streets of Jerusalem to Golgotha, the hill outside the city walls, and they nail him to a cross between two thieves. At noon, the sky goes dark. The Gospels tell us that from noon to 3 in the afternoon, darkness covered the whole land. 3 hours. In broad daylight, in the middle of the Judean spring, the sun disappeared. The earth shook. The veil of the temple, that massive curtain separating the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, tore from top to bottom. Rocks split open. According to Matthew, even tombs broke open. And the first person to understand what was happening wasn't a disciple. It wasn't a priest. It was a Roman centurion, a pagan soldier standing at the foot of the cross who, seeing all of this, said a sentence that would outlast the Roman Empire itself. Truly, this man was the Son of God. A pagan soldier, just like Claudia was a pagan woman. Once again, the outsiders seeing what the insiders refused to see. Once again, the foreigners recognizing what the chosen people denied. Claudia was inside the palace, while the darkness fell at noon, while the ground shook beneath the marble floors, while the screams carried from Golgotha on the wind. She had tried to stop it. She had broken protocol, broken custom, broken every rule that governed her world. And it hadn't been enough. That feeling, the weight of being right and being ignored, is one of the oldest human experiences, but few people in history have carried it on a day like that one. If you want to know what happened to Claudia after the crucifixion, stay right here, because the story doesn't end at Golgotha, and the twist in the next part is something almost nobody sees coming. If you're finding this interesting, subscribe to the channel. Next week's story is even darker than this one, and you don't want to miss it. The Gospel of Matthew is the only one of the 4 Gospels that mentions Claudia. One verse, Matthew 27:19. After that, silence. The biblical text tells us nothing more. We don't know how she reacted when the darkness lifted. We don't know what she said to Pilate that evening. We don't know if she wept, if she raged, if something inside her broke. But where the Bible goes silent, Christian tradition speaks, and it speaks loudly. Origen, one of the greatest Greek church fathers who lived in the 3rd century, believed that Claudia converted to Christianity after the resurrection. According to him, that dream was the seed of a faith that would grow into full conversion. And it wasn't just Origen. The Eastern tradition, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church, and the Ethiopian Church all venerate Claudia Procula as a saint. A saint. The wife of the Roman governor who signed the death warrant for Jesus is venerated as a saint. The Greek Church commemorates her on October 27th. The Ethiopian Church honors her alongside her husband on June 25th. Yes, Pilate too. In Ethiopian tradition, both Pontius Pilate and Claudia Procula are considered saints and martyrs. Pilate, a saint, the man who washed his hands. The Ethiopian tradition sees him as a man who tried to save Jesus and failed, then spent the rest of his life in regret, eventually converting and dying for his faith. Whether you believe that or not, the fact that an entire branch of Christianity arrived at that interpretation tells you something about the complexity of his story. But Claudia's legacy goes deeper. There's an apocryphal text called the Letters of Claudia Procula to Fulvia. Written probably in the 2nd or 3rd century, it's a letter where Claudia describes her life in Jerusalem and the events surrounding Jesus in personal detail. It's not canonical, it's not part of the Bible, but its existence tells us something critical. The early Christians were fascinated by Claudia. They wanted to fill in the silence that Matthew left behind. There's also the Gospel of Nicodemus, another apocryphal text from around the 5th century, which tells the story of Jesus' trial in much greater detail than the canonical Gospels. In this version, Claudia's dream plays a central role. Pilate is visibly shaken by his wife's message. And then something remarkable happens. The chief priests, Annas and Caiaphas, use the dream against Jesus. They tell Pilate the dream is proof of Jesus' sorcery, that Jesus himself sent the dream to manipulate the governor's wife. A divine warning, twisted into a prosecution weapon, a message from heaven, repackaged as evidence of witchcraft. But the most fascinating interpretation comes from a completely different direction. In the old Saxon poem Heliand, written in the 9th century, Claudia's dream comes from Satan. According to this reading, Satan sends the dream because he's terrified. He realizes that if Jesus dies on the cross, redemption will be accomplished. The gates of hell will be broken open. The dominion of sin will end. So Satan tries to prevent the crucifixion by warning Claudia. This flips the entire meaning of the dream on its head. It's not God warning Claudia to save an innocent man. It's the devil trying to stop God's plan by saving an innocent man. Which means in this version, Claudia, without knowing it, was being used by the enemy of everything she was trying to protect. The theology gets vertiginous here. Because if you accept this interpretation, the dream was genuine compassion weaponized by evil for a purpose Claudia couldn't possibly understand. She was trying to do the right thing from a human perspective. But from a cosmic perspective, the crucifixion had to happen. Jesus had to die so that death itself could be defeated. God and the devil, playing a game on a board no human being could see. And Claudia standing in the middle, acting from her conscience, unaware that conscience itself was being pulled in two directions by forces beyond her comprehension. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of the Christian faith. The worst crime in history is also the act that saved humanity. The death of an innocent man is the doorway to eternal life. And Claudia Procula is the human being standing at the intersection of that paradox, trying to do right in a situation where right operates on two levels that contradict each other. So what actually happened to Claudia and Pilate after the crucifixion? Let's step back for a moment. For centuries, the only source that mentioned Pontius Pilate as governor of Judea was the Bible itself. Many skeptics argued he was a literary invention. Then, in 1961, an Italian archaeologist named Antonio Frova was excavating an ancient Roman theatre near Caesarea Maritima on the coast of Israel. And he found a limestone block with a Latin inscription. The letters were partially eroded, but the ones that survived were unmistakable. Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. Exactly as the Gospels describe him. The stone is real. Pilate is real. The story is real. The historical record tells us Pilate continued governing Judea until 36 AD, about 3 years after the crucifixion, 3 years in the same land where Jesus had died and, according to his followers, had risen. 3 years while the Christian movement was growing day by day right under the governor's nose. The disciples were preaching in the streets of Jerusalem, steps from the praetorium, telling anyone who would listen that the man Pilate condemned had walked out of his own tomb. What conversations must Pilate and Claudia have had during those 3 years? He who tried to free Jesus through legal tricks and political gambits, she who told him the truth and was ignored, the ghost of that Friday morning hanging between them in every silence, in every meal, in every look across the room. Pilate's tenure ended the way it had always been heading. He ordered a massacre of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim. The Samaritans protested to the Roman governor of Syria, Vitellius, who outranked Pilate. Vitellius suspended him and sent him to Rome to answer to the emperor. But by the time Pilate's ship docked in Italy, Tiberius was dead. From that point, Pilate vanishes from the historical record. The traditions about his end are contradictory. Eusebius of Caesarea, the 4th century Christian historian, says Pilate killed himself in despair. Other legends place his death in exile, in Gaul, or in Switzerland, near a mountain that still bears his name, Mount Pilatus, above Lake Lucerne. Others, like the Ethiopian tradition, have him converting and dying as a martyr for the faith he once rejected. And Claudia, the official historical record says nothing. 0. After that single verse in Matthew, she evaporates from documented history, but tradition doesn't forget her. According to some sources, Claudia returned to Rome with Pilate and began secretly attending gatherings of the earliest Christians. In an empire where Christianity was viewed with growing suspicion, where the followers of Jesus met in private homes and underground chambers, Claudia would have been walking straight into danger. If her identity became known, the wife of the governor who condemned Jesus sitting among his followers, the political implications alone could have been fatal. In Paul's second letter to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 21, there's a greeting that has generated centuries of debate. Eubulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. Some scholars, since the earliest centuries, have identified this Claudia with Pilate's wife. There's no hard evidence. But the name, the era, and the Roman context make the connection at least plausible. If it's true, it would mean Claudia didn't just convert. She became an active member of the Christian community in Rome, the wife of the man who signed the death warrant, joining the followers of the man he killed. The early Christians watching her walk through their door would have faced the ultimate test of the faith they preached: forgiveness. The real kind, the kind that costs something. There's a parallel in Claudia's story that very few people catch, and once you see it, it restructures the entire narrative. Eve and Claudia. In Genesis, Eve uses her influence on Adam to lead him toward the forbidden fruit. Adam stands there in silence. He doesn't resist. He doesn't question. He follows her into transgression without a word. In the Passion, Claudia uses her influence on Pilate to lead him toward justice. Have nothing to do with that righteous man. She speaks clearly, directly, urgently. She tries to pull him away from transgression. But Pilate, like Adam, stays silent where it counts. He doesn't have the courage to act on what he knows is true. He gives in to pressure. He washes his hands. He lets the fruit fall. Eve speaks, and the result is the fall. Claudia speaks, and the result would have been salvation, if only Pilate had the spine to listen. In both cases, a woman's voice and a man's silence. But the consequences are mirror images of each other. And then there's Mary, the new Eve, according to Christian theology. Mary stands at the foot of the cross, silent, present, watching the new Adam, Jesus, die on the wood of the cross to undo what the first Adam did at the tree in Eden. Claudia stands between these two women in the theological architecture of the story. She isn't Eve, she isn't Mary, she's something different. She's the human conscience, the voice that speaks even when it knows it will be ignored. The ordinary person standing at the crossroads of cosmic forces, doing the right thing for the right reason, and being overruled by a husband too weak to listen. And that position, the position of the person who speaks the truth, knowing it won't be enough, is perhaps the most honest position any human being can occupy, because the world is full of situations where the right voice goes unheard, where the person who sees clearly is overruled by the person who calculates, where courage loses to convenience. Claudia's story isn't ancient history. It's every meeting where someone stays quiet because speaking up is too risky. It's every moment where the truth is obvious and everyone pretends it isn't. One final detail, and this might be the most extraordinary piece of all. There are 21 accounts of revelatory dreams in the Bible. 21 instances where God communicates with human beings through dreams. Jacob sees the stairway reaching to heaven. Joseph interprets the sheaves of grain bowing before him. Pharaoh watches 7 fat cows devoured by 7 lean ones. Daniel receives his nighttime visions of empires rising and falling. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, is warned in a dream to take his family and flee to Egypt before Herod's soldiers arrive. 21 dreams, and out of all 21, exactly one was given to a woman. One, the dream of Claudia Procula, the wife of Pilate, the only woman in the entire Bible to receive a revelatory dream from God, is a Roman pagan who grew up praying to Minerva and attending sacrifices at the Temple of Vesta. She's not a Jewish prophetess or a matriarch of Israel or a devout follower of the law of Moses. She's Claudia Procula, and that single fact tells you something enormous about how the Bible portrays divine communication. The message doesn't go to the most pious. It goes to the most open. It doesn't follow religious credentials. It follows the heart willing to respond. Claudia had no theological training, no prophetic tradition, no scripture to guide her. She had a dream and a conscience, and she acted on both. The name Claudia Procula has been lost to official history. There's no book of the Bible dedicated to her, no letter bearing her name, no chapter. There's a verse, a single verse. But that verse contains a lesson that 2,000 years haven't worn down. That courage doesn't require the right faith, it requires the right heart. That doing the right thing doesn't guarantee the right outcome, but staying silent guarantees the wrong one. That God, or truth, or whatever you want to call the force that moves the conscience, can speak through anyone. A prophet, a king, a fisherman, or the pagan wife of a Roman governor who prayed to the wrong gods and still heard the right voice. Claudia didn't save Jesus. She couldn't. The plan of salvation required the cross. But Claudia did something that Peter couldn't do near that fire, that the apostles couldn't do in their fear, that Pilate couldn't do with all the power of Rome behind him. She spoke. She called righteous the one who was righteous. She tried to stop an injustice, knowing the cost, accepting the futility, acting anyway. And for that, 2,000 years later, millions of Christians around the world remember her as a saint, Saint Claudia Procula, the pagan woman who tried to save Jesus. The next time you see something wrong and your mouth wants to stay shut, remember her. Remember the woman who woke from a dream so terrifying it overrode every rule she'd ever been taught. Remember that she spoke, and remember that it mattered, even though it didn't work. Because in the end, it's not the outcome that defines you, it's the choice. If this story moved you, subscribe. Next week I'm telling the story of the Roman centurion at the foot of the cross, the pagan soldier who said, "Truly this was the Son of God," while everyone else was running. You don't want to miss that one.